in India Construction Week 2020 to be held during 1 to 5 December 2020. I am Professor AcademiaEldho, Institute Chairperson and Head, Department of Civil Engineering, IIT Bombay. So I am going to give a talk on flood hazard management for smart city development by using computer simulation, remote sensing, and GIS. So as all of you know that flooding is a major problem, especially in India for last few years. So as far as urban development or city development is concerned, whenever flood takes place, it is a big issue as far as cities are concerned, and especially coastal cities. So when we look into these, the problems of urbanization, we can see that, so here, whenever the urbanization means, so lot of, say, pavement development, construction, and lot of areas are converted to impervious areas. So that way, you can see that there is a possibility of increased surface runoff in stream flow. So that is what is the output of the urbanization. So that means soil impermeabilization and decrease of concentration time, and then especially in urban areas we can see that increase of runoff. And then in most of cities what can happen is reduction of riverbeds, and then finally the outcome will be increase of flooding frequency. And then there is a lot of issues related to urbanization as far as the cities are concerned. So when we talk about smart cities, we need to look in such a way that we have to develop the city such that the flooding problems can be reduced. So when we look into the urbanization and its impacts on hydrology, so generally, so as I mentioned, the lot of areas will be converted to impervious areas, and that way in the cities there is possibility of increased in magnitude of peak runoff, and then decreased lag time between rainfall and runoff, increased rate of hydrograph and recession, and decreased mean residence time, and then topographical changes. Then there is no space for detention basin, and like that, so many problems. So we are going to discuss what are the impacts of urbanization, or say in terms of a smart city, what are the problems with respect to the hydrology and, say, for example, flooding. So as I mentioned, flooding is concerned, say for example, if this is a, so here in hydrology we call it as hydrograph, so this is time versus flow versus time. So here if this is a, say, not an urbanized area, normal, like a village or a normal area without much urbanization, then you can see that the hydrograph, so it will be in a natural watershed, it will be something like this. But as I mentioned earlier, due to the heavy urbanization, a lot of areas are converted to impervious areas with respect to roads, buildings, and other areas. Then what can happen is that, so this hydrograph, you see that increased peak, so increased peak flow duration, and then compared to this higher peak flow, and then there can be more frequent stormwater runoff events and then related problems. So that way this all lead to flooding, especially in urbanized areas. So when we talk about smart cities, we need to design the city, we need to plan the city in such a way that this effect on hydrology like flooding is reduced, or flooding is managed in an appropriate way. So when we look into what are the problems as far as urban flooding is concerned, so as I mentioned, flood is the most threatening natural disaster. So if you look into condition overall the world, and especially in India, we can see that in the last few years, a number of events, flooding events we can see, starting from, say, for example, the last 20 years, starting from Hyderabad in 2020, then Ahmedabad in 2001, Then Delhi in 2002, 2003, Chennai 2004, Bangalore 2005, 2006, Mumbai a heavy flood in 2005. And now recent times, for example, in Chennai 2015 and Kerala 2018 and even 2019. So this, say for example, Mumbai is concerned, recurring floods in Mumbai region we can see in most of the years, and especially at least once in 2 years or once in 3 years, heavy flooding we can observe in Mumbai. And this is peculiar for coastal cities. Coastal cities, just like so you see that like in Mumbai or in Chennai or in Calcutta, all these places you can see that urban flooding is a major problem. And coastal urban cities, you can see that they are vulnerable to flooding under combined heavy rainfall. Being coastal means there is possibility of tides, high tides. So we need to look into how we can mitigate these flooding problems and what are the possible solutions. And when we design a smart city, what aspects we can look into, or how we can manage the flood if there is a possibility of flooding. So that is what we are going to discuss in this lecture. So in terms of flooding, so flood impacts and solutions. So as I mentioned, the flood is a major disaster. So it has huge impacts in terms of economy, then environmental impacts, health impacts. So there can be, some people can die. There is so many issues can take place with respect to flooding. So for example, Mumbai flood, what has happened in 2005. So death in Mumbai reported as around 500 or 454. And in Navi Mumbai it is 66. And about rupees 70 crores lost to MIDC in TTC belt. So like that, so much of issues took place in 2005, July 26 flooding in Mumbai. And say, for example, if you look into Chennai floods in December 2015, so more than 400 people died. And then there is an estimated loss of more than $7 billion. And more than 2 weeks, there was disruption in the city. And then the recent times in Kerala, so 2018, if you look into Kerala flood, was very, very severe flooding took place in August 2018, and more than 300 people died, and economic loss was, say, estimated is more than 30,000 crores, and disruption of many places, including Cochin Airport, for more than 2 weeks. So when we look into this flooding, what are the major factors responsible? So you can look into a mixed bag of causes. So like a heavy rainfall, one reason, then inadequate drainage, then there is it's maintenance, the maintenance issues of drainage system, and then as I mentioned in coastal cities, tides, floodplain, occupation, etc. Like there are so many reasons. So in this India Construction Week, I'm going to discuss how we can manage the floods. So what are the way we can do in terms of computer simulations, and then what kind of mitigation management practices which we can do as far as flooding is concerned. So this is an important problem, especially when you talk about the construction week. Though, as I mentioned, I am talking in terms of when you develop a smart city, we need to look into all these aspects. So for flood management, we need to look into the various design practices, then maintenance of the drainage system, then awareness. So in terms of engineering, we can try to model or we can simulate what is, say, for example, given rainfall conditions, or say return periods, 100-year return period, 50-year return periods. Various scenarios can be generated, and then we can assess the various options, and then we can develop a smart city in terms of its implementation. So as I mentioned, in India, this flooding is a major problem, and you can see that due to climate change impacts, which is reported last 2 decades, and then its impacts or due to the drastic changes as far as the land use, land cover is concerned. So you can see that especially coastal areas, the flooding is increasing, as I mentioned already. So there is a series of events last 20 years. We can list some of the events like Kerala floods in 2018, Chennai floods 2015, Uttarakhand floods in 2014, like that. And then also, especially in the eastern belt, from the Bay of Bengal, you can see that cyclone is a major problem, and then the flooding problems due to cyclones. So these are also, you can see, especially in this area. So when we look into the flood management, we need to, as I mentioned, it can be heavy rainfall or various other reasons. So we have to look into, so last few years we are talking about climate change. So what are the, whether it is due to climate change or whether due to human interventions, all those things we need to look into in a holistic way. So climate change, as I mentioned, climate changes will have a significant effect on regional or local hydrology. So this is very much visible in India the last few decades. So alteration hydrology caused by climate are so complex. So you can see that it is what can happen in future. It is unpredictable. So now we can create various scenarios nowadays using global circulation models or general circulation models. So it is only in terms of we can create various scenarios or various projections. So these warming climates have potential to intensify the hydrology cycle. Hydrology is concerned, then intensify the hydrological extremes, and then changes in rainfall seasonality. So we can see that there can be human interventions. So as far as human interventions are concerned, mainly the change in land use, land covers. You can see that urbanization is increasing. So if it was hardly less than 20%, say 20 years back, now it is going to more than 40% urbanized areas in India. So that way, we need to see that the human interventions, the changes in land use, land cover, and then changes in crop shifts, mining, deforestation, all these affects as far as flooding is concerned. And dams and diversions change river courses and river flow patterns, and rapid growth in urbanization increase in impervious areas. So that way there is a need to distinguish the impacts of climate change from human interventions. And then we need to study in detail when we talk in terms of smart city development. So here you can see in this slide the flood impacts and management. So if you consider a city like this is, for example, in Cochin city area in 2018 flooding, you can see that many areas are flooded and even the water has come to the roof level. So that is why we need to look into, especially when we talk about the Indian construction, we need to design, we need to plan the cities in such a way that the flooding impacts are minimal, or we need to see that what kind of, if there is a possibility of flooding, what kind of mitigation measures can be taken care. So when we talk about urban flood management, there are various issues. So we need to study the hydrology in detail. So hydrometeorology we need to study in detail. Then how we can manage or how we can forecast the rainfall and then flooding forecast, so that immediate water management after forecast that we need to see. And then we need to see the urban flood modeling, the flood simulation. So that is what we will be briefly discussing here. And then we need to look into in terms of impacts, like what will be the flooding impacts, then what kind of adaptation and what kind of assessments can be done. So these are some of the major issues as far as urban flood management when we talk in terms of the flood management issues, especially in terms of a smart city development is concerned. So that way, when we talk about urban flood management, flood simulation, flood modeling is very essential. So role of modeling is very, very important. So nowadays, you see that especially when we talk about urban flooding, process is so complex, the hydrology is so complex, the land use, land cover changes are so complex. So we need modern tools like the remote sensing tools, a lot of data is required, and then geography information system is required, and then a numerical model or computer modeling is required. And then through this, we can develop flood hazard maps, and then by using the vulnerability, which areas are more vulnerable, and then this can, using this, we can develop flood risk map. So that will be very useful, especially in the smart city development or urban flood management is concerned. So when we talk about flood modeling, there are so many challenges. So the key challenges include data. As I mentioned, so much data is required in these kinds of modeling. So like especially the rainfall prediction, what will happen in the few weeks. So and then so what kind of drainage system is there, and then most of the time we need a high resolution detail elevation model so that we can see which are the areas possible flooding and how much flooding is possible. And then also we need to look into interaction between different processes, that also we need to see, like tides, release from reservoirs, impact of urbanization, etc. And then, so as I mentioned, when we talk about the flood management, now as I mentioned, there is so many tools are available, very say efficient models are available. So we can integrate these tools like geography information system, then flood model, numerical model, and then also we can use the remote sensing data for all these aspects. So this figure shows integrated flood modeling, how we can develop a flood model, starting from, say, if you have got a distributed hydraulic model like this, and then we get the land use land cover map using remote sensing data, and then everything is put it in a GIS platform, geography information system platform, and then using that we can run the flood model, and then we can say that, okay, what is the possibility of whether a particular area can be flooded. And so we can create scenarios in advance, say like 100-year return period, 50-year return period, 25 years return period. And using this, we can just go for the urban development or smart city development. So as part of some sponsored project, IIT Bombay in Civil Department, we have developed a number of flood simulation models. So as part of DST, Department of Science and Technology, after the 2005 flooding in Mumbai, we developed a model, a flood model for a smart city. So the details are available in this journal, Computers and Geoscience in this journal. So for interested, you can look into this paper. So this model is concerned, various components are there, like, so you see that everything is developed in a geography information system, and we used extensively remote sensing data. So if you get the rainfall prediction, and then first we identify the overland, and then overland, there is an overland flow module. And then say from that overland flow, so if, for example, if this is your area, and here you see that this is so-called overland, this is a channel, and then we will be routing, and then at any location we can get to the flooding possibilities. And then also if there is a detention pond, that also we can look into this. And then especially coastal area, if tide is there also, we can do that, and then a flood model is developed, and which gives the inundation. So this shows how we conceptualize, this is the overland flow, this is the channel flow, and then the model is developed, say by combining a one-dimensional and two-dimensional model, especially with respect to overland flow. So now to make it, especially for smart cities, as I mentioned, if there is a prediction of the rainfall for next 24 hours, 48 hours, so then using this model, we can put it in a WebGIS model. This was developed in a WebGIS platform, and then so we can use it. So at any location we can sit using the computer system. We can see that which area there is a possibility of flooding. So this is all done using say the model which I mentioned earlier, using detailed elevation model. And then this is a platform. So here there is say like in Mumbai city, there is a municipal corporation is concerned organization internet available, and then at various locations this model can be used. And this is the development of a WebGIS based simulation model. So here the working methodology includes, so here there is a WebGIS client, and here special database preparation, then detailed elevation model extraction, And as I mentioned, already a flood model is developed, and that will be the simulation. And then this everything is coming into a WebGIS platform. And then we can get for a given rainfall condition, there is a possibility of flooding and which area will be flooding and what depth is the flooding. And then accordingly, we can have a flood hazard map. So this is this is called India Flood Assessment Model tool. So this is the overall system. So there is a WebGIS, as I mentioned, and then so there is a platform, and then we can say if a rainfall pattern is known, we can directly predict the flooding possibilities, or even we can generate the flood maps for return periods like 100-year return period, 50-year return period. So everything was developed just like in a Google map. So you can see that if this is your urbanized area, and then this is various say urban areas, especially this is in Navi Mumbai, and then we put all this data, and then if you know the rainfall pattern, then we say this is we run the model. So this is the rainfall pattern, and then we can get the hydrograph, and from the hydrograph, say at various locations how the flooding can take place, and then what is the inundated area, all those things we can get through this model. So this model details also you can see in this journal of Natural Hazard Springer, and it was published in 2014. Those who are interested, you can go through it. So this model we used to identify how the flooding is happening in a urban watershed in New Bombay or Navi Mumbai. So this is the area, and here this is called a detailed elevation model. And then land use, land cover, this area almost 70% is urbanized area. And here using this, this is the rainfall, about 775 millimeter rainfall took place in 26 July 2005, and correspondingly how the flooding is taken place. So that is simulated using the model which I mentioned. And now you can see how the flooding is happening. So this is the beginning of the rainfall, and then after 2 hours, so how it is happening, the flooding is continuing. So every hour, minute wise, we can capture the radiation. 2 hours, 4 hours, 8 hours, 10 hours, like that. So you can see here is the creek, and from here the tide is coming in, and then here the rainfall due to rainfall overnight flow. These are all the urbanized areas, and then various pockets flooding and how much depth it is flooding. So that way we can have an efficient tool called India Flood Assessment Model, which was developed by IIT Bombay. And now again further development is done in IIT Bombay. So here we developed a flood hazard mapping. Say for example, this is in Mumbai, Mithi River Basin is most of the years flooding is happening due to the high tide and heavy rainfall. So this is so using the models which we developed, or even we can use commonly available models like HECRAS, HMS models. We can use it, and we developed a flood hazard map. Say for example, this is for 100-year return period, which area is more possibility of flooding, very high, moderate, like that. We can get the flood hazard map, and this shows these details are available in this journal paper. Is published in Journal of Natural Hazards in 2015. So then using this flood hazard map, we can identify the vulnerability. So we will be preparing vulnerability maps. So these are various social vulnerability, infrastructure vulnerability, land use vulnerability, social vulnerability. So various vulnerability maps and the flood hazard map can be combined, and then we can generate so-called flood hazard map. So this shows very high risk. This is called a flood risk map. So very high risk areas, some of these areas where especially the Mithi River is flowing, and then high risk areas, moderate risk areas. So like that, we can develop this kinds of flood risk map. So this is very useful, especially if you are going to especially smart city development or any kind of urbanization planning. We can develop these kinds of flood hazard map first, and then vulnerability maps, and then flood risk map. So, and then further, if flood is taking place or there is a possibility of flooding in a particular area, then we can have a Center for Disaster Flood Management, and there, as I mentioned, we can have an organized intranet, and then we can develop a system, an integrated flood management system can be developed, and then we can monitor, and then also we can go for the mitigation measures as shown here. So here, say like disaster impact to assess relief response, recovery, rehabilitation. So this is a risk management was after the 2005 flooding in Mumbai. This kind of center was developed in Mumbai city, and then now it is working very efficiently. So before closing this lecture, so as I mentioned, so flooding is a major problem, especially in urban development, especially in smart cities. Flooding is we need to look into in a holistic way. So we need to have a early warning system, that is we need to look into. So mechanisms of integrating the scientific and technological and administrative agencies for effective disaster management is very essential. And also we need to look into terrestrial communication links which collapse in the event of that. We need to plan in advance, especially in 2005 flooding, it has happened in Mumbai. And then also we need to look into vulnerability of critical infrastructure, power supply, communication, etc. And these are all the guiding principles as far as smart city development is concerned. So what I was talking, especially an Indian flood model which you developed at IIT Bombay, so which was developed in a geographic information system platform, and the tool can be used to evaluate evaluate the performance of existing network for various scenarios. So we can, as I mentioned, 100-year return period, 50-year return period, like that. We can, whenever we are going to develop an airport or any kind of system, there we can have this kind of say flood hazard maps, flood vulnerability maps, and then flood risk map. And then, so this will be also very useful, especially in cities. So if you are going to develop a, say for example, a housing colony or a major infrastructure, then we need to assess what is the possibility of the risk involved or the vulnerability as far as the flooding is concerned. So that way, generation of flood hazard map and identification of vulnerability areas are very important. And these kinds of tools serve as platform for near real-time simulation. And so that is very important in most of the cities, especially when we talk in terms of smart cities. So I am very happy to say present this this lecture in the India Constitution Week. And those who have got any questions, you can. I'll be very happy to answer. My email is given eldho@civil